What happens when a beloved country music superstar sits down for what should be a lighthearted, late night interview and instead finds himself under attack by a host who seems more interested in tearing him down than having a conversation? In just 46 seconds of one comment, one smug remark too far, an entire interview would explode into one of the most shocking exits in talk show history. Blake Shelton walked onto that stage expecting the usual banter, the laughs, maybe some playful ribbing about his music or his time on The Voice. What he got instead was something completely different, something that would test his patience in ways he never imagined. The studio audience was hot that night, cheering as Blake made his entrance. He waved, that signature grin on his face, and settled into the guest chair across from Bill Maher. The cameras were rolling. Everything seemed normal at first. "Blake Shelton, everybody," Bill said, and the crowd applauded again. "Thanks for being here." "Thanks for having me," Blake replied, relaxed, leaning back in his seat. Bill shuffled his note cards, that smirk already forming on his face. The kind of smirk that suggested he had something brewing, something he thought was clever. "So, you're a country music guy. That's interesting." Blake nodded, still smiling. "Yeah, been doing it my whole life pretty much." Right, Bill said, tapping his cards on the desk. "And you're from, where is it, Oklahoma?" "That's right, born and raised." "Oklahoma," Bill repeated, drawing out the word like it meant something distasteful. "That's red state country, isn't it?" The audience murmured a little. Blake's smile tightened just slightly, but he kept his composure. "Well, it's a beautiful state with great people. Great people who probably think very differently than people here in Los Angeles, I'd imagine," Bill continued, leaning forward now. "I mean, different values and all that." Blake shifted in his seat. "I think people are people, Bill. We've all got more in common than we think." "Do we, though?" Bill asked, his eyebrows raised. "Because from where I'm sitting, country music, especially the kind you make, it's all about pickup trucks and beer and, that whole lifestyle that frankly seems pretty simple." The energy in the room changed. You could feel it. The audience wasn't sure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Blake's jaw tightened. "Simple," Blake repeated. "That's an interesting word choice." "Well, I don't mean it as an insult," Bill said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just saying, it's not exactly the most intellectually challenging genre, is it? I mean, compared to, say, jazz or classical music." Blake took a breath. "Stay calm," you could see him thinking. "Don't let him get to you." "Music is music, Bill. It speaks to people in different ways. What matters is if it connects with folks, if it makes them feel something." Sure, Bill said dismissively, waving his hand. "But you have to admit, there's a certain, how do I put this, lack of sophistication in songs about dirt roads and Budweiser." "I write about real life," Blake said, his voice firmer now. "Things that matter to real people." "Real people," Bill echoed with a chuckle. "You mean people who don't live in cities? People who probably didn't go to college?" That got a reaction from the audience. Some gasps, some uncomfortable shifting. Blake sat up straighter. "I mean people who work hard every day," Blake said. "People who love their families and their communities. What's wrong with that?" "Nothing's wrong with it," Bill said, though everything about his delivery suggested he thought otherwise. "I'm just saying there's a world beyond that. A bigger world, with bigger ideas." "Bigger ideas," Blake said slowly. "Like what, Bill? Like sitting behind a desk and making fun of people you don't understand?" Bill laughed, but it was forced. "I'm not making fun of anyone. I'm just having a conversation." "Are you?" Blake asked. "Because it seems like you invited me here just to take shots at me and where I'm from." "Oh, come on. Don't be so sensitive," Bill said, leaning back in his chair. "This is what we do here. We joke around. We have fun." "Fun," Blake said. "Right." Bill glanced at his notes again. "So let's talk about The Voice. You've been a coach on that show for, what, 100 years now? Long time, yeah, Blake said, not taking the bait on the exaggeration. And you sit there and you judge people singing, Bill continued. Which is ironic because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but country music isn't exactly known for its vocal complexity. I mean, you're basically talking in melody most of the time, aren't you? The audience was getting more uncomfortable. You could hear it in the silence. Blake stared at Bill for a long moment. You really don't like country music, do you? Blake asked. It's not that I don't like it, Bill said. It's just not for sophisticated listeners, you know? It's for people who want simple stories and simple melodies. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. We need music for all levels of intelligence. Blake's face hardened. All levels of intelligence. Yeah, Bill said casually, as if he hadn't just insulted millions of people. Look, some people want to think when they listen to music. They want complexity and depth. And some people just want to hear about their truck breaking down and their girlfriend leaving them. Different strokes for different folks. Bill, Blake said, his voice low and controlled, I came here tonight to have a good time, to talk about music and maybe share some laughs. But you've spent the last several minutes insulting me, my music, and everyone who enjoys it. I haven't insulted anyone, Bill protested. I'm just being honest. This is what I do. I say what everyone's thinking. No, Blake corrected him. You say what you're thinking. And what you're thinking is that you're better than other people because you live in California and you watch foreign films or whatever makes you feel superior. Bill's smile faded a bit. I don't think I'm better than anyone. Really? Blake asked. Because you've called my music simple, unsophisticated, for people with lower intelligence. You've insulted an entire state, an entire region of the country. And you think that's just honesty? I think it's comedy, Bill said. Maybe you're just not used to it coming from Oklahoma. And there it was. The audience actually gasped this time. Blake stood up from his chair. You know what, Bill? Blake said, his voice steady, but you could hear the anger underneath. I've dealt with a lot of things in my career. Critics, tough crowds, you name it. But I've never sat across from someone so full of themselves that they can't see how small they're being. Small? Bill asked, standing up too now. I'm small? You're the one who can't take a joke. A joke is funny, Blake shot back. What you're doing is just mean-spirited and elitist. You think because you have this show and this platform that you can just run people down and call it entertainment? This is my show, Bill said, his voice rising. If you don't like how I do things, you can leave. The studio went dead quiet. Blake looked at Bill for a long moment. Then he looked at the audience. Then back at Bill. You know what? Blake said. I think I will. He started to unhook his microphone. Bill's face went from smug to shocked in seconds. Wait, what are you doing? Bill asked. I'm leaving, Blake said simply. I don't need to sit here and be disrespected, and I don't need to give you the satisfaction of using me as your punching bag for the night. You can't just leave in the middle of an interview, Bill said, and now he sounded almost panicked. We're on television. Watch me, Blake said, pulling the microphone pack from his belt. A producer rushed onto the stage, looking frantic. Blake, please, can we just take a quick break and... No, Blake said firmly but politely to the producer. I'm good, thank you, but I'm done here. He turned back to Bill. You might want to think about how you treat your guests, Bill, because this whole condescending act you've got going, it's not as charming as you think it is. Bill's mouth opened and closed. For once, he seemed at a loss for words. This is ridiculous. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Blake asked. Or am I just someone who knows their worth and isn't going to sit here and smile while you insult everything I care about? The audience was completely silent now. Some people were pulling out their phones. The cameras were still rolling, catching everything. You're going to walk off my show over a little criticism? Bill asked, trying to regain some control. That's pretty thin-skinned. It's not criticism, Bill, Blake said, setting the microphone on the chair. Criticism is constructive. What you did was just petty and ugly. There's a difference. I think you're overreacting, Bill said, but his voice had lost its edge. He was scrambling now. And I think you're used to people just sitting there and taking it because they want to promote whatever they're selling, Blake replied. Well, I don't need this that badly. I'd rather walk away with my dignity than sit here and pretend this is okay. Blake, come on, Bill tried, his tone shifting to something almost pleading. Let's just talk this out. We tried talking, Blake said. You weren't interested in a conversation. You were interested in feeling superior. And I'm not going to help you do that. He looked out at the audience one more time. I'm sorry you all came here to see a show and got this instead. That's not fair to you. Some people in the audience actually applauded at that. Not everyone, but enough that you could hear it. Bill's face went red. Don't apologize to them. They came to see my show. Then give them a show worth watching, Blake said. One where you actually respect your guests. He started walking toward the stage exit. Bill called after him. You know you're never going to be invited back here, right? Bill shouted. Blake stopped and turned around one last time. Bill, that might be the best news I've heard all night. And with that, he walked off the stage. The cameras followed him as he went through the backstage area, past stunned crew members, toward the exit. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked relieved. Back on the stage, Bill was left standing there, trying to figure out what to say to the audience. Well, that was something, he stammered. I guess Blake Shelton doesn't have a sense of humor. But the audience wasn't buying it. The energy in the room had completely shifted. They had just watched a host belittle a guest until that guest had had enough and walked away with their head held high. And it was clear who had come out looking worse. Bill tried to make a few jokes to recover, but they fell flat. I mean, come on. It was just a conversation, he said weakly. I didn't think he'd be so sensitive. But even as he said it, you could see on his face that he knew he'd gone too far. He'd pushed too hard, been too cruel, and it had backfired spectacularly. The rest of the show was a disaster. Bill couldn't get his rhythm back. Every joke felt forced. Every comment felt bitter. The audience sat there politely, but without the energy from earlier. They had just witnessed something real break through the usual talk show fakery, and there was no going back from that. Blake, meanwhile, left the studio and got into his car. No dramatic statement to the press waiting outside. No angry tweets. He just left, went back to his hotel, and moved on with his life. The whole thing, from the first insulting question to Blake walking off stage, had taken maybe 15 minutes. 15 minutes that exposed everything wrong with the kind of smug, self-satisfied entertainment that treats guests like props instead of people. What Bill Maher had forgotten, sitting behind his desk with his writers and his audience, and his sense of superiority, was that people aren't obligated to accept disrespect just because there's a camera pointed at them. They can say no. They can stand up. They can walk away. And that's exactly what Blake Shelton did. He walked onto that stage as a guest, expecting a normal interview. He walked off as someone who had drawn a line and refused to let it be crossed. No yelling, no throwing things. Just a calm, firm decision that he was worth more than what he was being given. Bill had tried to make Blake look like a simple, unsophisticated country singer who couldn't hang in the big leagues. Instead, Blake showed everyone watching that real sophistication isn't about where you live or what music you like. It's about how you treat people. It's about having enough self-respect to walk away from situations that demean you. The cameras captured the whole thing. Bill's smirking questions. Blake's increasingly tight jaw. The moment when Blake stood up and started unhooking his microphone. The shock on Bill's face when he realized his guest was actually leaving. Blake's calm, dignified exit while Bill scrambled to save face. It was the kind of television moment that cuts through all the rehearsed bits and scripted banter. It was real. It was raw. And it was a reminder that beneath all the lights and cameras and production, these are still just human beings having conversations. And when one of those human beings decides they've had enough, no amount of commercial breaks or clever editing can change what happened. Blake didn't destroy any property. He didn't curse anyone out. He didn't make threats or throw a tantrum. He simply recognized that he was in a situation where he wasn't being treated with basic respect, and he removed himself from that situation. That's not being thin-skinned or unable to take a joke. That's having boundaries. Bill had miscalculated badly. He'd thought he could treat Blake the way he probably treated dozens of other guests, peppering them with condescending comments disguised as humor. But Blake wasn't playing that game. He'd come to have a conversation, and when it became clear that wasn't what Bill wanted, Blake made a choice. The studio audience sat there in stunned silence after Blake left, watching Bill try to recover. But there was no recovering from that. You can't insult someone repeatedly, watch them walk away with dignity, and then convince everyone watching that you're the reasonable one. It doesn't work that way. Bill kept trying, though. He made jokes about country music fans, being sensitive. He suggested that maybe Blake couldn't handle real conversation. He implied that walking off a show was somehow proof that he'd been right about everything. But none of it landed because everyone had seen what actually happened. They'd seen a host abuse his power and position to make himself feel clever at his guest's expense. They'd seen that guest try to be gracious and redirect the conversation multiple times. They'd seen the host ignore those attempts and double down on the insults. And they'd seen the guest finally say, "Enough is enough." That's the thing about live television. You can't edit out the truth. You can't cut away from someone's face when they realize they've crossed a line. You can't hide the audience's reaction when they see something that makes them uncomfortable. It's all there, captured forever. Blake's walk-off wasn't planned. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a genuine moment of someone reaching their limit and responding with grace instead of anger. He didn't trash Bill on his way out. He didn't try to humiliate him the way Bill had tried to humiliate Blake. He just stated his position and left. That restraint, that dignity, made the whole thing even more powerful. Because it showed that Blake wasn't acting out of ego or pride. He was acting out of self-respect. There's a difference. Bill had set up the whole interview to make Blake look foolish. Small-town guy comes to the big city and gets shown how things really are. Unsophisticated country singer gets schooled by worldly talk show host. That was the narrative Bill wanted, but Blake flipped the script entirely. He showed that real sophistication has nothing to do with geography or musical taste. It has to do with character, with knowing who you are and not letting anyone diminish that, with being able to walk away from toxicity even when it's inconvenient. The producers probably wanted Blake to stay. It would have been easier for everyone if he just laughed along and pretended the insults didn't bother him. But easier isn't always better. Sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing, the uncomfortable thing, the thing that disrupts the plan. Blake did the hard thing. He stood up, literally and figuratively, and said, "This isn't okay." And in doing so, he gave everyone watching permission to do the same in their own lives, to recognize when they're being disrespected, to know that they don't have to accept poor treatment just because someone else thinks it's funny or acceptable. Bill's show continued after Blake left, but it was never the same that night. The spell was broken. The audience had seen behind the curtain, and what they saw wasn't pretty. They saw a host who valued his own cleverness more than his guest's dignity. They saw someone so convinced of his own rightness that he couldn't see when he was being cruel. And they saw Blake Shelton walk away from it all with his head high, his integrity intact, and nothing left to prove. He didn't need Bill's show. He didn't need Bill's approval. He just needed to respect himself enough to leave a situation that wasn't serving him. That's the story of what happened that night. Not a story about a country singer throwing a fit. Not a story about someone who couldn't take criticism. A story about a man who knew his worth and refused to compromise it for anyone's entertainment. A story about setting boundaries and sticking to them, even when it's difficult. A story about choosing dignity over convenience. Blake Shelton walked off that stage, got in his car, and drove away. Simple as that. But in that simplicity was something profound. A reminder that we all get to decide what we will and won't accept. That we all have the power to say no. This isn't okay. I'm done here. And that exercising that power isn't weakness. It's strength. The interview had started so normally. The usual entrance, the usual applause, the usual pleasantries. Nobody in that studio could have predicted what was about to unfold. Even Blake, settling into his seat with that easy smile, had no idea he was walking into an ambush. Bill's opening questions seemed innocent enough on the surface. Where are you from? What kind of music do you make? Standard talk show fare. But there was something underneath. A tone, an edge, like he was setting up dominoes, getting ready to knock them all down. Tell me about growing up in Oklahoma, Bill had said early on, before things really went south. What was that like? It was great, Blake had answered honestly. Small town, everybody knew everybody. We looked out for each other. How quaint, Bill had replied, and there was that tone again. Dismissive, patronizing. And you never wanted to leave? Never wanted to see what else was out there? I did leave, Blake had pointed out. I moved to Nashville, built a career, but I never forgot where I came from. Right, Nashville, Bill had said. Another red state, another place where things are, shall we say, traditional. Blake had let that one slide at first, gave Bill the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just trying to be provocative, get an interesting conversation going. That's what talk show hosts do, right? Push a little, see what happens. But it didn't stop there. Bill kept going, kept pushing, kept adding little digs and jabs disguised as observations. Each one a bit sharper than the last. Each one designed to make Blake look small, and Bill look smart. Your fans, Bill had said at one point. They're pretty loyal, aren't they? Very loyal, Blake had agreed. I'm lucky to have them. They follow you everywhere, buy all your albums, come to your shows, Bill continued. Do you think they really understand the music, or do they just like the whole package? The image? The lifestyle you're selling? And there it was again. The insinuation that Blake's fans were somehow less than, that they were being sold something, rather than genuinely appreciating art, that their taste was questionable at best. They understand it just fine, Blake had said, his patience wearing thinner. Probably better than you do. Bill had laughed at that. Oh, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they connect with it on their level. Their level, Blake had repeated. You keep talking about levels, Bill. Like there's some hierarchy of people, and some are better than others. I'm not saying anyone's better, Bill had protested. I'm just saying people have different capacities for different things. Some people enjoy complex literature and opera. Some people enjoy, well, what you do. It was relentless. Every answer Blake gave, Bill found a way to twist it into something condescending. Every attempt Blake made to steer the conversation somewhere more positive, Bill blocked it and went back to the insults. The thing was, Blake handled it remarkably well for as long as he did. He tried humor. He tried redirection. He tried earnest explanation. He gave Bill multiple opportunities to change course, to back off, to turn this into an actual conversation instead of a one-sided roast. But Bill didn't take any of those opportunities. He was too committed to his bit, too enamored with his own cleverness. He thought he was being edgy and provocative. He thought the audience would eat it up. He was wrong. You could see it on people's faces in the crowd. The initial uncomfortable chuckles had faded. Now, they were just sitting there, watching this man tear down his guest piece by piece, and they weren't enjoying it. This wasn't fun. This wasn't entertainment. This was mean. When Blake finally stood up, when he'd finally had enough, the relief in the room was palpable. Someone was finally saying what everyone was thinking. Someone was finally standing up to this bully behind the desk who'd forgotten that his job was to have conversations with guests, not to belittle them. "You know what your problem is, Bill," Blake had said as he was leaving, right before he walked off stage. "You've surrounded yourself with people who laugh at all your jokes and tell you you're brilliant, and you've started to believe it. You've started to think that your opinion is the only one that matters." Bill had tried to interrupt, but Blake kept going. "But out here in the real world, people see through it," Blake continued. "They see someone who's more interested in hearing himself talk than actually listening. Someone who thinks being harsh is the same as being honest. It's not." Those were some of his last words before he left. Clear, direct, true. The walk-off wasn't about ego. It wasn't about being unable to handle tough questions. It was about recognizing toxicity and choosing not to participate in it anymore. It was about self-preservation and self-respect. Bill had created a situation where the only winning move for Blake was not to play. So Blake stopped playing. He picked up his pieces and went home. And in doing so, he won in a way Bill never could have anticipated. Because when people think about that interview now, they don't remember Bill's clever insults or cutting remarks. They remember Blake standing up for himself. They remember him walking away with dignity. They remember a man who knew his worth and wouldn't let anyone diminish it. That's the power of knowing when to stay and when to go. Of understanding that some battles aren't worth fighting because you've already won just by refusing to engage. Blake didn't need to destroy Bill or make him look foolish. Bill was doing that all on his own. Blake just needed to remove himself from the situation. And he did it perfectly, calmly, firmly, with grace and strength in equal measure. He showed everyone watching what it looks like to respect yourself even when others won't, especially when others won't. That night, Blake Shelton taught everyone a lesson that had nothing to do with music or fame or entertainment. He taught them about boundaries, about dignity, about the courage it takes to walk away from something that's hurting you, even when walking away is hard. Bill Maher sat behind his desk and tried to salvage his show, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped. Everyone had seen who he really was in that moment. Someone more interested in feeling superior than in genuine connection. Someone who had forgotten that the people sitting across from him are human beings deserving of respect. Blake got in his car and drove away from that studio, leaving behind the cameras and the chaos and the host who'd underestimated him so badly. He didn't look back. There was nothing back there worth looking at. Just a man behind a desk who'd mistaken cruelty for comedy and paid the price for it. The interview that was supposed to make Blake look small ended up making him look bigger than ever. The host who thought he'd expose Blake's simplicity ended up exposing his own pettiness. And the moment that was supposed to be entertainment became a masterclass in self-respect instead. 46 seconds. That's all it took for one comment to push things past the point of no return. One smug remark about intelligence levels and music appreciation. One insult too many. And Blake Shelton said enough. No more. I'm done. He stood up. He unhooked his microphone. He said what needed to be said. And he walked off that stage like a man who had nothing to apologize for and everything to be proud of. That's how you handle a bully. Not by fighting on their terms, but by refusing to play their game at all.